This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
Chapter 1. Birth and Character of Antonina, Her Marriage with Belisarius, Her Adulterous Amours, Services rendered by her to the Empress Theodora, Her Passion for the Thracian Theodosius, Adoption of the latter, The Lovers surprised by Belisarius, His Weakness, Revelation made by the slave Macedonia, Flight of Theodosius, Vengeance of Antonina upon Macedonia and upon Constantine, who had spoken insultingly of her. Theodosius refuses to return to her until the departure of her son Photius, retirement of Photius, demands of Theodosius, his return, infatuation of Belisarius, his return to Byzantium, Theodosius enters a cloister at Ephesus, despair of Antonina, she causes him to be recalled, his resistance, his secret return. Chapter 1. The wife of Belisarius, whom I have spoken of in my previous writings, was the daughter and granddaughter of chariot drivers, men who had practised their art in the circus at Byzantium and at Thessalonica. Her mother was one of the prostitutes of the theatre. She herself at first lived a lewd life, giving herself up to unbridled debauchery. Besides this, she devoted herself to the study of the drugs which had long been used in her family, and learnt the properties of those which were essential for carrying out her plans. At last she was betrothed and married to Belisarius, although she had already borne many children. She formed adulterous connections as soon as she was married, but took pains to conceal the fact, by making use of familiar artifices, not out of any respect for her husband, for she never felt any shame at any crime whatever, and hoodwinked him by enchantments, but because she dreaded the vengeance of the empress. For Theodora was very bitter against her, and had already shown her teeth. But after she had made Theodora her humble friend, by helping her when in the greatest difficulties, first of all by making away with Silverius, as shall be told hereafter, and afterwards by ruining John of Cappadocia, as I have already described, she became less timid, and, scorning all concealment, shrank from no kind of wickedness. There was a Thracian youth, named Theodosius, in the household of Belisarius, who by descent was of the Eunomian faith. On the eve of his departure for Libya, Belisarius held the youth over the font, received him into his arms after baptism, and thenceforth made him a member of his household, with the consent of his wife, according to the Christian rite of adoption. Antonina therefore received Theodosius as a son consecrated by religion, and in consequence loved him, paid him especial attention, and obtained complete dominion over him. Afterwards, during this voyage, she became madly enamoured of him, and being beside herself with passion, cast away all fear of everything human or divine, together with all traces of modesty, and enjoyed him at first in secret, afterwards even in the presence of her servants and handmaidens, for she was by this time so mad with lust that she disregarded everything that stood in the way of her passion. Once, when they were at Carthage, Belisarius caught her in the act, but permitted himself to be deceived by his wife. He found them both together in an underground chamber, and was furiously enraged at the sight, but she showed no sign of fear or a desire to avoid him, and said, "I came to this place with this youth to hide the most precious part of our plunder, that the emperor might not come to know of it." This she said by way of an excuse, and he, pretending to be convinced, let it pass, although he saw that the belt which held Theodosius's drawers over his private parts was undone, for he was so overpowered by his love for the creature that he preferred not to believe his own eyes. However, Antonina's debauchery went on from bad to worse, till it reached a shameful pitch. All who beheld it were silent, except one slave woman named Macedonia, who, when Belisarius was at Syracuse after the conquest of Sicily, first made her master swear the most solemn oaths that he never would betray her to her mistress, and then told him the whole story, bringing as her witnesses 2 boys who attended on Antonina's bedchamber. When Belisarius heard this, he told some of his guards to make away with Theodosius, but the latter, being warned in time, fled to Ephesus. For the greater part of Belisarius's followers, influenced by the natural weakness of his character, were at more pains to please his wife than to show their devotion to him, and this was why they disclosed to her the orders they had received concerning Theodosius. When Constantine, an officer of Belisarius, saw Belisarius's sorrow at what had befallen him, he sympathized with him, but was so imprudent as to add, "For my own part, I would have killed the woman rather than the youth." This having been reported to Antonina, she conceived a secret hatred for him until she could make him feel the weight of her resentment, for she was like a scorpion, and knew how to hide her venom. Not long afterwards, either by enchantments or by caresses, she persuaded her husband that the accusation brought against her was false, whereupon, without any hesitation, he sent for Theodosius, and promised to deliver up to his wife Macedonia and the boys, which he afterwards did. It is said that she first cut out their tongues, and then ordered them to be hewn in pieces, put into sacks, and thrown into the sea. In this bloody deed she was assisted by one of her slaves named Eugenius, who had also been one of those who perpetrated the outrage on Silverius. Shortly afterwards, Belisarius was persuaded by his wife to kill Constantine. What I have already recounted about Presidius and his daggers belongs to this period. Belisarius would have let him go, but Antonina would not rest until she had exacted vengeance for the words which I have just repeated. This murder stirred up a great hatred against Belisarius on the part of the emperor and of the chief nobles of the empire. Such was the course of events. Meanwhile, Theodosius refused to return to Italy, where Belisarius and Antonina were then staying, unless Photius, Antonina's son, was sent out of the way, for Photius was naturally disposed to show his spite against anyone who supplanted him in another's good graces, but he was quite right in feeling jealous of Theodosius, because he himself, although Antonina's son, was quite neglected, whereas the other was exceedingly powerful and had amassed great riches. They say that he had taken treasure amounting to 100 centenars of gold, about £400,000, from the treasure-houses of the 2 cities of Carthage and Ravenna, since he had obtained sole and absolute control of the management of them. When Antonina heard this determination of Theodosius, she never ceased to lay traps for her son, and to concoct unnatural plots against him, until she made him see that he must leave her and retire to Byzantium, for he could no longer endure the designs against his life. At the same time, she made Theodosius return to Italy, where she enjoyed to the full the society of her lover, thanks to the easy good nature of her husband. Later on, she returned to Byzantium in company with both of them. It was there that Theodosius became alarmed, lest their intimacy should become known, and was greatly embarrassed, not knowing what to do. That it could remain undetected to the end, he felt was impossible, for he saw that the woman was no longer able to conceal her passion and indulge it in secret, but was an open and avowed adulteress, and did not blush to be called so. For this reason he returned to Ephesus, and after having submitted to the tonsure, joined the monastic order. At this, Antonina entirely lost her reason, showed her distress by putting on mourning, and by her general behaviour, and roamed about the house, wailing and lamenting, even in the presence of her husband, the good friend she had lost, so faithful, so pleasant, so tender a companion, so prompt in action. At last she even won over her husband, who began to utter the same lamentations. The poor fool kept calling for the return of his well-beloved Theodosius, and afterwards went to the emperor, and besought him and the empress, till he prevailed upon them to send for Theodosius, as a man whose services always had been, and always would be, indispensable in the household. Theodosius, however, refused to obey, declaring that it was his fixed determination to remain in the cloister and embrace the monastic life. But this language was by no means sincere, for it was his intention, as soon as Belisarius left the country, to rejoin Antonina by stealth at Byzantium, as, in fact, he did.